July is coming to an end, a sad end of sorts if you enjoy summer. A sad end for me. I'm trying to hang on to my very busy summer, but with August on the horizon, that does mean the fall is very near, and that means college football, that means college basketball. That means a lot to discuss and cover here at WV Sports Now and Mountaineer Report. I am your host, Mike Oste, and you can find this and every episode of Mountaineer Report available everywhere you get your podcasts, on YouTube and throughout the West Virginia Sports Now network. I will be joined, of course, by my co-host here, Luke Blaine, and we are going to talk about still a summer event as Best Virginia, representing West Virginia and WVU in the TBT, and advancing on and going further than the last couple years and kind of reigniting some interest in that event. Luke has been covering it directly for us in Charleston, and they still got another game ahead after this show in Charleston, now in the Elite Eight after winning the West Virginia Regional. We're going to talk Ross Hodge as he did a little summer update before he gets fully underway as well. It tells us how his offseason was going. He told us about his roster and kind of teased maybe he's not done. And then Rich Rod's been called crazy. So people have been talking about Rich Rod all offseason. He's been on every show in America all offseason. He's the most interviewed guy and coach in the country, really. But is this overhaul and the fact that he really thinks that this program is going to win right away and can do this Kirk Cignetti thing crazy? Because Kirk Cignetti brought in 30-some. He's 70-plus new players. Is it really crazy? David Pollack at least thinks so. We will see if we do. Again, Mountaineer Report on WV Sports Now. So, Luke, how you been, man? And to get us started, you've kind of been a busy man for us the last week or so with WV Sports Now. In particular, as I mentioned at the top, we will give this the headline of this show because it probably won't be any of the future shows once they get into fall camp, no matter what this team does. But Best Virginia is playing in the TBT. They're going to be in Charleston again on Monday against the Maryland alumni team. So that'll be a little interesting maybe for some regional rivalry within the TBT. Regional rivalry didn't really work out so well for West Virginia the last couple of years, but they did beat That as part of their run this season. They're 3-0, but it's been close games. They almost blew every one of them, but yet Gerard West, a coach who actually has the coaching chops maybe to do this. Kind of last year's team was gobbled together, and that coach even admitted he got the job late and wasn't sure he was ready for it. So this appears to be a run. What has this been like? What do you think a TBT championship would mean to the state, to these players? How has this been different than in recent years? And do you really think this team has a chance to actually win this whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a really good time. A lot of trips back and forth to Charleston just about every other day last week,
Yeah.
but it's a good time. It is a fun media environment. I will say you're down right there, right in front of all the action. And like you said, this Best Virginia team has squeaked out a couple wins, particularly that first game against Du Bois Dream, where it looked like they were just going to run away with it. And then heading into the Elam Ender, they went down, I think, like 3 or 4 points, and they managed to claw back, and 2 free throws from Toby Okani.
Yeah.
That was something in and of itself. I mean, but they're it seems like they've meshed really well, probably better than a lot of Best Virginia teams have in recent years. And they talk about that a lot because they only really had one official practice. And it was a practice that not even everybody was fully there for. I think it was J.D. Weatherspoon who came late.
Yeah.
But, thinking about that and the way that the team has come together, Weatherspoon has become a key contributor because after that first game, he didn't play. And he actually talked about how he messaged Coach West and was like, hey, I can play. If you need it, I can, help out. And West was like, be ready. And he documented that in the win after Heard That. And in that game against Heard That, he finished with 10 points and 14 boards. And I mean, he's been a force, a physical force down low.
Yeah.
And with the way this team has come together, it seems like they have the rotations figured out. It seems like, because every team's doing that, apart from those teams that might play a little bit the year round. But whenever it comes to alumni teams, you get a different cast of characters just about every year. And now this Best Virginia team seems to be one of the teams that's kind of gelled more than a lot of the other ones. It feels like everybody knows their roles. The guards play so well off of each other. James Reese has been huge. I mentioned
Yeah.
he played for Ross Hodge at North Texas, and I mentioned that to him yesterday at the press conference, and he was like, "Yeah, we're going to turn him into an honorary Mountaineer." So it was cool. And he and Keedy Johnson. It's good to see Keedy Johnson back in the gold and blue, and Trey Mitchell has been putting up some big shots for WVU. He's showed up, and I mean, it definitely felt like that game against Elite Nation was going to get out of hand, but they were composed. They hit shots. They showed up. I mean, they got the crowd into it.
Yeah.
I mean, this looks like a team that very much like has the mentality to go all the way. We'll see how their skill sets match up against other teams, but I mean, this seems like a team that plays together.
And it's amazing because they've only been together for a few weeks. That is the issue for these alumni teams, and that's also why that a lot of these more professional teams or teams that are representing a charity or teams that play in other tournaments win the TBT, because the TBT is not the first time they've played together as a team when that is the case, generally speaking, for Best Virginia. And most of these alumni teams that, as you're saying, are not even all alumni of the school anymore, which was the original
Yeah.
idea of the TBT, which could be a whole conversation for another day. You mentioned igniting the crowd, though, and I've talked about that covering it in Pittsburgh last year when they got bounced by the Pitt alumni team, who didn't even field a team in this year's tournament because they couldn't get the funding for it. And it does go to show that it's not a guarantee to be there. So you got to give the tip of the cap to John Flowers and company to always get the funding if you like this. Best Virginia has been one of the staple teams in the TBT for 7 years or so, or however long they've been doing this. So to finally make a run and win this thing at least once, I think would be a big deal and legitimize Best Virginia as kind of being the face of the TBT. And team-wise, alumni team-wise, they've kind of been that. These other teams, as I mentioned with Pitt not playing this year, they've been in it one year, they've been not in it the other year, they've been in it one year, but not in it the other year. Best Virginia's every year. But you lose to Pitt last year, we talked about in the last show, and you lose to Marshall the year before in West Virginia when you're still classified as the host team. And at that point, they were the number 1 seed with a lot of hype to win it that year. Eric Stevenson was on that team. That was right after the Huggins scandal. He pointed to Huggins, won the first game. They didn't win again, and that was it. So you come in this year, you had pressure to actually win to keep the fans interested, because there were some fans saying, if we're going to get bounced right away, I don't want to do this. Why don't we skip a year or so like other programs seemingly are doing? And this year, no, they go on this run. They win the regional the second time for West Virginia to win a regional. Gerard West is back. I think that's a very understated part of this, because he knew how to do this, and he's coaching like this is a high school championship or a college championship, etc. And they did kind of have to cobble this team together because Eric Stevenson was going to play again, but then got the call from Miami Heat. They had to put this team. I mean, Trey Mitchell wasn't even on this team until earlier in the month of the tournament. But you mentioned igniting the crowd. What has the crowds been like? How much have they really been ignited from game 1 to game 3 through winning the regional? And I don't know if you read any of the other past TBTs. I did say I covered some, if there was any comparison, but I'll give you the comparison then. The last couple of years, including even a couple of years ago in West Virginia, the crowd was there early, but it was a pretty, we don't care about doing this anymore after losing to Marshall. And the crowd in Pittsburgh, even though there's a lot of West Virginia fans in Pittsburgh, was just bad for Pitt, for West Virginia, for everybody. I mean, Pitt, West Virginia, and Penn State were all there at the Pete, and there's a lot of fans of those 3 programs in Pittsburgh, and it was just lack of interest in general. Even for Pitt fans, and they won it. They won the game, and then Penn State, I believe, beat Pitt after that. But what has it actually been like for somebody who's not been any of these this year in Charleston?
I mean, there's energy in the building whenever they're playing. It's really it feels like I don't want to say it feels like you're back at the Coliseum, but to a certain degree it does.
Okay.
The Let's Go Mountaineer chants get going. Cade, the Mountaineer, was at the last game, and it was more so the case, I think, in the first two rounds, but in the game against Elite Nation, the third game, the crowd kind of dispersed a little bit, which is kind of, I think, to be expected after Heard That is eliminated. And,
I guess,
the
yeah.
first couple days, the Best Virginia and Heard That are playing, and you get some extra fans from the other teams, but those are the main two teams that everybody from West Virginia is here to see. So, I mean, but in the Elite Nation game, there were some crowd pops, man. There were some really good that. There were some good
Okay.
moments that the fans got into. John Flowers, I think, one game started the "Let's Go Mountaineers" chant. I mean, he's obviously having a good time with this. He hasn't played yet, but uh,
It's kind of how he was last year. He's the GM player, but
yeah,
he's really the GM. Yeah.
yeah, he kind of gives the people what they want, and
Yeah.
it's a fun environment. I think fans are getting bought in, especially after that first game where I
Yeah.
I mean, this team was very close to not making it out of the first round,
That would have
like
been rough.
extremely close.
That
That
would
would
have
have
been
been rough.
rough.
I
Yeah.
would have hated to see the fan reaction after that.
Yeah.
But you have players. I mean, I think it's also you have players, a lot of good recent Mountaineer players too,
Right.
with Toby Okani. I mean, Toby Okani's not like a stat sheet filler for the score side. I will say he's been doing well on the rebounds and a lot of good hustle plays. He had a couple blocks in the last game, but you have Okani, Andre's there. Andre's playing time has been very little, but also you have the
Wardell Harris.
reuniting of Keedy Johnson and Trey Mitchell. You have a West, I mean, not a former Mountaineer, but you're looking at Jared West Jr. He's been out there making some plays, and Wesley Harris.
Yeah.
A lot of those guys that it's just been a lot of fun to see. Mountaineer players from past and as close to the present as you can get. So, I mean, I think that's probably helping fans buy in a little bit too.
Was it a situation, and I'd imagine, especially when you had Best Virginia verse Heard That in Charleston, that there was a noticeable contingent of Marshall support, or was it still predominant Mountaineer support? Because I will say the game in Wheeling a couple years ago, there were a decent amount of Marshall fans. There were more quote unquote road fans than in any other game, but it was still significant West Virginia fans there. And that's, of course, a northern location close to Pittsburgh, even closer than Morgantown. There's no Marshall fans in Pittsburgh, even though there's West Virginia fans there. So maybe there's a couple, actually, no one, but there's not many. So in Wheeling, I kind of could see that, but I would think that there's a better opportunity maybe for that to even up a little bit in Charleston. You did mention the crowd dispersing a little bit. So was it noticeable that there's people here just to see Heard That, and then once they're out, they're not interested in WVU? Because there are the Marshall fans that seemingly just hate WVU and do not want anything else besides Marshall. They're out there.
There were some there was a good bit of Marshall fans there in the Best
Okay.
Virginia Heard That game. WVU definitely had the edge. I would be curious to see what the Marshall crowd would look like if John Elmore and Tavion Kinsey were active.
Yeah.
They were, of course, with the Kings in the NBA or Summer League, excuse me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that uh, there are definitely some fans that are solely there to see WVU. Some of those fans obviously were there just to see Marshall because they didn't come back on they didn't come back on the in the Elite Nation game. But it was
Yeah.
there's been a steady fan presence. I mean, it
It's interesting.
the lower bowl wasn't filled. One side for Best Virginia, the side where the players were seated, was a lot more full than the other side. But I mean, as somebody who, whenever I'm watching, I'll just start, kind of typing and then look up, and I'm not
Yeah.
looking side to side. There was energy. There was a lot of energy, and it kind of
Okay.
felt like not like a full house, but to a degree, it almost felt like there were more people there than there actually was. And I think that's big time for this West Virginia team, especially when you're playing against a team like Elite Nation, who probably doesn't have this giant fan base who would come out and watch them if they were in any one location. So, I mean, that's been huge for West Virginia. I think, I mean, the players feed off of it. You
Yeah.
see them going over, and Trey Mitchell hit the Elam Ender, and he went over with his hands up like that. And I believe James Reese did too, kind of celebrating with the crowd. So, that the crowds have been much more important than I think a lot of people understand for this West Virginia team.
I also will say that part of the disappointment of the event in Pittsburgh is that if you're not going to have a rabid crowd, it does take away the luster and the bloom off the rose of doing an alumni tournament. I mean,
Yeah.
you didn't really get the crowd fanfare that you would think an alumni backyard brawl game would get. So you're at least getting that with West Virginia playing Marshall continuously in West Virginia. When it happens in July, and now we're lingering into August if they keep winning, but in July, we're yet to see fall camp. We're yet to get underway in those sports, even though they're on the horizon. This is the time to do it. And John Flowers again and others really care about it. So seeing a crowd like that, seeing a game against Herd that, West Virginia making a run this year, I think it continuously supports an interest in doing it every year. And even WVU supporting it in general. Clearly, Ross Hodge tweeting about it, Ren Baker tweeting about it. I mean, they're interested in this happening. You can't say that about every school, and it does make you believe they're likely going to try to field a team next year, etc. And the pressure was on the team to win this year, and they have delivered. Was there any, because I saw this on social media, I'm just wondering if it was just, sometimes things are just social media and they don't trickle to actually in person. I think this meant probably, I'm hypothesizing, was just a social media thing. But was there any at all vibe of West Virginia fans not wanting Trey Mitchell on this team? Because that was a social media reaction a little bit, because obviously he did transfer out, did go to Kentucky. He left after the Huggins scandal. Hard to blame him. And he went to Kentucky. It really is, if you're being logical. But there were a lot of fans on social media when he was added to the team that were not thrilled about it, to the point that I will say someone in West Virginia messaged me privately and we discussed it. Like, it was noticeable. There were people that were upset about it. But then he, it leads them to a victory. I think they probably get over it. He got to feel a little bit of the Marshall rivalry. He didn't get to play in it during his season at West Virginia. Did that linger in person at all, or did people just say, it's an alumni tournament, we'll take him now? Because he didn't, they're not all WVU alums even. You mentioned West Junior. He didn't even play at WVU. He played at Marshall. But Trey Mitchell was maybe one of the most noticeable best players that transferred out at that point. And there were even some that thought Calipari was taking advantage of the program, etc. So there were some that didn't want him on social media, but did that linger into in person at all?
That didn't. I will say that, nobody yelled anything. Shoot, I was walking down in game 3, and there was like a younger kid who, as I was walking down, started yelling, "I love you, Trey Mitchell!" And it was just, it was, it's. I think that it's one of the downfalls of social media is everybody has to know what everybody's thinking all the time. And even I, like, I wasn't opposed to Trey Mitchell coming, but I was also like, it's a little odd, whenever I first saw it, because there was a Kentucky team.
I was going to say he could play on the Kentucky
There was a
team.
Kentucky team.
Right.
So it was
right.
like, sure, whatever. But, I think that should be a good thing for fans whenever a player wants to come back. And I think that the heartbreak of players transferring ends up turning into resentment in ways that I don't think it should.
Yeah.
We have to understand that at the end of the day, I don't truly believe the players owe the fans a lot if they're after the season's over. I think they owe it to the fans to go out there and play hard and do the best they can. But after the season, if another opportunity arises that they have the chance to go and better themselves, whether it be financially or in terms of advancing their professional career, and say that was not going to be the case for Trey Mitchell if he would have stayed after Bob Huggins left.
Yeah, that was arguably the worst season in program history.
Yeah, we saw what that team looked like. Nobody knew what that team was going to look like. And if you were playing and you had a chance to go and be, I believe he started on Kentucky, either start on Kentucky or go with an interim head coach at West Virginia for a year. I mean, like, don't be dumb. Don't say like, no, I would stick it out. No, you're
Yeah.
gonna go to Kentucky, and
Yeah.
like that.
He
You
played
know
in the tournament
that.
for them. That was actually, ironically enough, his
Oh, he
last
did.
game.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I actually covered it because that was when it was in Pittsburgh. So he was on the Kentucky team that ended up being Calipari's last NCAA tournament game with Kentucky, where they lost early when Oakland went on that run and beat
Yeah.
them
I
in
was. Oh,
Pittsburgh. And that was Trey Mitchell's last game. That was Coach Cal's last game at Kentucky. But I mean, certainly still way better,
yeah.
despite the disappointment for Kentucky fans and maybe what he thought out of the year, than if he would have been at West Virginia and deal with the 9-win, either worst or second worst, whatever argument you want to give for season in program history for the Mountaineers under an interim coach and Josh Eiler. That would have been horrible. And yeah, I'm right with you. You have to think of this. Fans don't want to, but this is a business now for the players as much as it is for anybody else. Not only do you not blame somebody, and this is really a year-to-year thing, that as long as they play hard for you for the year, and then you can't guarantee much else than that. If they want to come back, great. If not, it's up to them. Everything is a year-to-year business. We can
Yeah.
get into whether it should be. Rich Rod talked about that Big 12 Media Days. It'll be on different shows. We'll discuss certainly. I do think there needs to be some contractual agreements in some way that if you agree to a 2-year deal, you do the 2 years. But players may still say, okay, I'll sign a 1-year deal. They may not want to do a 2 or 3-year deal because they do want to have the freedom. And if they're there with freedom and transfer portal, it's no different than a coach can leave after a year and have someone pay the buyout. So it's hard to blame them. This is a year-to-year business now in college sports, whether you like it or not. But especially when the Hall of Fame coach you wanted to play for ends up being ousted and you have an interim coming in, that much uncertainty, you're in a national scandal. I mean, you can't blame anybody. I think the most loyal Mountaineer fan, if they were playing basketball and trying to better themselves individually, might have had to make the same decision. And of course, Trey Mitchell didn't grow up a WVU fan. So it's always funny to me, too, because Trey Mitchell didn't start his career at West Virginia. Mountaineer fans, or any fan of any college program, they're very willing to take a player as a transfer, but then they want to cast them off for the rest of their lives if they would then leave. So it works both ways. You don't mind taking, but you don't want them to do the same thing to you. And I mean,
and I mean, like that.
Yeah.
But those are just thoughts I've had. I mean,
No, for
it's
sure,
just like, and
for sure.
especially in the TBT. I mean, it's just like it's not that serious, guys.
Yeah, it's
like,
not
I mean,
like it's not like he's coming back to coach at WVU, right? It's a little
yes,
different.
absolutely. And then those are just some thoughts I've had stirring since a particular wide receiver entered the transfer portal for the football team. I'll just say that. And but I you did mention Kentucky's tournament run. I was really hoping we would get the Trey Mitchell and Jack Golke rematch because he was on the Ohio alumni team this season, and they played against Elite Nation, and they almost won it. Like, they were close.
That would have been
so
fun.
I was really hoping, because I mean, I would have loved to pick Trey Mitchell's brain in the post-game press conference after that win if the next guy up would have been Jack Golke.
And that's why the TBT kind of is cool, because you have the possibility of those events. I mean, a lot of these players are not going to be stars in the NBA, of course. And if you are having that chance, you're likely in summer league. But if you're a player that's not, this is potentially a rare opportunity to see a rematch that ended a college career or something like that. Elmore has become a staple of the TBT for Heard That, which is why Flowers and others were kind of disappointed he couldn't play. And I saw Flowers ask him to still come out and support West Virginia. I don't know if he got to any games or will be there on Monday, because now he's free with the end of summer league. That'll be really interesting if he does show up.
That'd be awesome.
But you might even get that, because that's kind of the cool factor of this. And they also are playing for money, which is how you get them very, very interested in doing this. But it also shows you that there's not ill will on Trey Mitchell's side for him. Yeah, he could represent Kentucky. I'm sure they would take him.
Yeah.
And he's choosing to do this instead. Flowers convinced them he's doing this for West Virginia. It's just a year-to-year thing. Who knows if he would have stayed if not for the Huggins scandal. But the reality is that happened and he didn't stay. But it's just a year-to-year thing now. And yeah, you mentioned Hudson Clement, who's you're referring to. We did a whole show on that, and I've done some commentaries on that. And fans definitely went awry there. And it's a little different because it's a homegrown kid, but still, you can't get that emotionally attached in this era because it is a business, and there's really nobody in the world who would turn down way more money and a better situation for themselves professionally, and they expect it yet out of these kids. Mountaineer Report here, WV Sports Now. Luke Blaine, Mike Osti here. We were talking best Virginia's run here in the TBT. And before we fully segue to Ross Hodge and the current Mountaineers, I guess just simply, and Trey Mitchell could be a big part of that. I already see people here in the chat already talking about Trey Mitchell being potentially an impact player, that if he plays well, this team then could win and could actually win this whole thing. Why do you think best Virginia can win the TBT? And, is that something that maybe you think is likely to occur? Like, I don't know, like, where are you predicting hat wise if you want to go there?
It is hard to predict, I will say.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I personally, I was not that confident they were going to make it past Elite Nation, knowing just the overall size of that team. I think there were 1 or 2 7-footers on that team.
Yeah.
And Best Virginia is a bit undersized in a lot of aspects. But I think that when you get to this point in the tournament, I think, especially the earlier rounds too, it depends on how well the team gels and how well they come together and how well they find their roles and start playing as a team. And I think you are getting the best results possible out of Best Virginia for that particular aspect of the game. And JD Weatherspoon talked about that after the Elite Nation win. They were like, there are no guys who were like, I need the ball, I need to go score. And it's like, everybody's trying to do what they need to do. Coach West ended up mentioning that Toby Okani drew up a play and he did a pin down for Reese, who hit a 3. And those are the type of things, like, it seems like this team's bought in and that they're doing what they need to do to get the job done. And I think that's where WV or Best Virginia has an edge here. And I'm not saying the other teams don't have that. They absolutely still have to do that. But it seems like they go out there and they want it. Keedy Johnson is out there talking trash whenever he gets the opportunity. It's awesome. I thought Wesley Harris and Ja'Cory Williams from Marshall were going to get ejected for some of the things that were happening down low. And but I will say, on top of the aspect of the players wanting it, Keedy Johnson had an interview, I think, with the TBT where he said this game against Shell Shock is absolutely a revenge game for him, because final game of his Mountaineer career was that tournament loss to Maryland in the first round.
Yeah, last game of Huggins' career.
Last game of Huggins. And I think that, if they're going into it with that mindset, they actually have they'll have around a full week of practices under their belt.
That's true.
Why not?
It is interesting to
absolutely
have
be
so
in the
much
Final
time.
Four.
It is interesting to have so much time between games. I get having some time, but this is literally almost a full week. You could argue that you could have done this game maybe over the weekend instead of lingering to Monday. But hey, you're going to give a decent amount of time, which I'm sure is great for West and company, since they didn't really get to practice together before the West Virginia Regional. And it's also interesting how players view it, or even how fans would view games like that. Is it really a revenge game where you feel like you got revenge, or not? In all reality, you'd rather win the NCAA tournament game that doesn't give Huggins another game, that doesn't give you another college game. I'm sure both programs would rather win the game actually in college basketball, but you have a player who's there who does feel like maybe some revenge could be had. So that's interesting, to say the very least. Luke Blaine here, Mike Osti, Mountaineer Report. Now, Luke, you also were at Ross Hodge's summer update press conference, and this also came on the heels, and he didn't talk about it, but somebody did bring it up in the chat. We're not going to do a whole segment on this, but it did come on the heels of Ren Baker's contract extension that morning being announced. And as the chat discussing here, as I've seen, most of the reaction has been positive, and it's a good thing. And it should quiet some of the noise that he's in rumors for literally every open job in every major conference every day. Should quiet some of that noise. I'm sure it won't, but everything Ren Baker said, now he's put his money where his mouth has been. He's going to be around, and that's a good thing for the Mountaineers, for the athletic department, for the programs, based on what he's done so far under the circumstances he's had to deal with. That was not discussed by Hodge, but what else do you take away from the Hodge press conference, where he talked about the roster, a little bit of his offseason, and then I know you put on the site, kind of teased still more to come from Hodge for anyone trying to learn this team. Maybe pump the brakes for a moment.
Yeah, there wasn't I don't think there was too much of an insight into where the team is developmentally. I think that, whenever he was talking about it, he's talking about how, but he did say the players want to get it and they're not quite getting it yet in terms of what they want to do defensively and, what the coaches are quite asking of them yet in terms of, going out there and executing. But he was like, they want to get it. And that's important. And I firmly believe that's important. And he, eventually said the players who want to get it eventually get it. And you have to think with this defensive mindset that Hodge brings to it, as well as the offensive capabilities of the players he's brought in.
Yeah.
You have to imagine if they can really sit down on defense and, turn the ball over and get going the other way, you have to imagine there's a decently high ceiling for this team, because of the success that Ross Hodge has had on the defensive end at North Texas. And, looking back, whenever this signing was announced, and I heard that it was a defensive-minded coach, I was kind of, I always kind of end up, questioning that a little bit. But after the inaugural presser and seeing how much heart and passion he had for the game, and now he's bringing in high-end scores. Trayson Eaglestaff was phenomenal last year. Honor Huff led the nation in three-pointers made. So you have to imagine that if they can, like he said, if the players want to get it and things start falling into place, eventually they're going to get there because, nobody expects them to have it all figured out. It's, July. So I think that I think that come time to play, once the schedule gets announced, once, I wonder if they'll do an exhibition game this year, but you think about, things of that nature. And once this team gets on the ground running and we have we don't even know what the starting lineup's going to look like. So I have some ideas, but we just have to wait and see. And I think that's the big thing for this Ross Hodge presser is that the team isn't really even finalized. There's, still some moving parts and, kind of a wait and see what this final roster spot looks like, wait and see what the schedule looks like, and wait and see until the team gets fully together and goes out there and plays against somebody other than themselves. He did mention it's hard.
Yeah.
He said it's hard to get better when all you're playing against is yourself. And, I think that rings true. So I think come regular season time, we'll really see what this team's about. But my expectations are definitely drifting a little bit higher than what they were whenever Hodge was first announced as head coach.
Yeah, and again, it's out there, so I'll admit this. I wasn't really high on the Hodge hire initially. It wasn't really because he's a defensive guy. I do think that's a positive of him. It's just because his experience level as a head coach in D1 was only 2 years, an assistant prior to that. Yes, he's had success, and I even asked him at the intro presser, it's not fair to him, but he's going to be taking on more pressure than even a normal head coach at a Power 4 program or even the Mountaineers would, because they're coming off of DeVries missing the tournament, even though a 10-win turnaround, but they did miss when they should have got in, and then he leaves in controversy. Eilert, again, one of the worst seasons in program history. Huggins, they got in the tournament after missing, but controversy and drama, and the fans are just done and fed up with controversy, drama, and missing the tournament. There is an expectation to get in the tournament, and when Ren Baker opens up press conferences saying, we've been in 31 NCAA tournaments, we've been in this many Sweet 16s, Elite Eights, Final Fours, now they have a national championship claim and a banner. When you do those things, the expectation then becomes you got to get minimum get in the tournament every year. You can't just keep on missing and being a laughingstock and have all this drama. So the pressure's on Hodge to get in right away, especially when DeVries turned it around from 9 to 19 wins in year one. If he ends up with a 13-win season, it'll then be fair to say, is DeVries a better coach than you? Because you both had transfer situations. He turned it around quickly. You're saying it's going to be years. That's why Hodge, it appears, is now admitting, and he's done this in interviews even recently, hey, he expects to contend right away. It might be a process, but he expects to get in the tournament. He expects to build consistent teams that continuously make the tournament, and then he expects to contend for a legit national championship. That's what he's saying. It's kind of the Rich Rod motto. Some fans may roll their eyes, but that's what he's saying, and I like hearing it. I like the confidence, And as we've touched on the site, and as you brought up before as well, he wants to mirror the Houston program that kind of got off of their wilderness decade trek of being mediocre. They now are back to being elite and almost won a national title last year off of really a defensive minded mentality, and offense will then come. They're a little bigger. I think that's still potentially a concern for this team. Granted, it's a bigger Mountaineer team than what DeVries had. So we will see, but the expectations are definitely there. I think there's reason to be a little bit more optimistic. Did anybody ask anything about, I didn't really see this, about he brought in solid transfers. You mentioned Eagle Staff. You mentioned Honor Huff. There are others, but there's not a power 4 guy like Javon Small. Was that talked about at all? Because I do know from when I talked to him at one of the W Fan Caravan events, I asked him about that, and he kind of danced around it and still said that a lot of the players he did bring in were winners, even if not at the power 4 level. He has a player from FAU that went to a Final Four. But was that re-brought up at all? Because I did see he kind of reiterated and repeated himself a lot in that press conference and what he's been saying in the offseason. So did he get that question again?
He did, and he, like you said, he did mention, players that are comfortable winning is what they look for. He talked a lot about, personality fits. He talked, and then he went into, these guys have experience winning, and he was like, so now it's just an act of trying to figure out how they can win together and try to help them learn that and get there. And I think that's a solid, a solid mindset to have. You just have to imagine that it would be hard to get a lot of P4 transfers to a school like West Virginia after the past 2-3 years that they've had. I mean,
DeVries did it, though. That's the only thing.
DeVries did do it. Yes.
That's the only thing. I agree with you. But DeVries, despite coming off the Isla year, he got it done. That, I think, is the only thing that feeds into you have an inexperienced head coach, because DeVries was coming in off of NCAA tournament appearances, even if not at the power level. So maybe it was an easier sell to a Javon Small to come with DeVries than it would be to Hodge, which goes back to the concern on hiring Hodge. Because, again, you have the same expectations for the team, but you have players that are coming from a lower level. And it wasn't like all power 4 transfers by any means for DeVries, but he did bring in Javon Small, and his son was a power 4 caliber player, even though obviously Tucker wasn't from a power 4. So DeVries did a little better recruiting than Hodge has done, even though Hodge has done better than some would have thought.
Yeah, no, I've been very impressed with the job that Hodge has done, because whenever I mention the defensive mindset, I thought about, I thought about St. John's last year. It was very good defensively, but they could not shoot. Like that was not a shooting basketball team. That's where my mind initially went, and we saw how it worked out. I mean, they were a second round bounce, which I predicted in my bracket, actually. So I'm gonna pat I did.
Okay.
I actually I don't know if I told you this. My bracket this year was perfect after day one.
After day one, okay.
That was a big deal for me.
I had to look back off the top of my head. I think I might either have been perfect or missed one game after day one, but it definitely was not good the rest of the way, for sure. But
things fell apart in day 2 pretty hard, I will say. I picked the Acroneers to make it to the Sweet 16.
Oh, okay. Wow.
That didn't happen.
I did not go in that direction, but okay.
I was so high on that Akron team, man.
Okay. All right.
I love that Akron team, but so moving into this year for WVU, that's where my mind was at. I kind of worried about looking like St. John's, like if you recruit just defensive minded players, and with respect to Sincere Harris, you don't want to put 5 Sincere Harrises out on the court, because who's gonna go out? And I mean, I love watching Sincere Harris play. He was one of the best defenders in the Big 12 this year, but there was some to be desired on the offensive end. Not to throw a stray at him, but you're just trying to think about it that way. So you definitely need some scoring, and that's where I'm kind of getting to the point of, if you can have a confident defensive mindset and turn that into offense. He mentioned in the opening presser how he's known Mark Kellogg for a while. If he can figure out some ways to turn defense into offense, which is what Mark Kellogg's done.
100%.
That is their bread and butter over there on the women's side. So
they didn't think they had big scores coming into last year. Quinterly's great, but she's not exactly a 30-point a game scorer. Everyone else was kind of just an average offensive player, and Kellogg has been able to turn defense into offense, 100%. And it also got Quinterly
Yeah.
into the WNBA. Like that has worked. I mean, who knows if it's going to work in translating to the men's team, but that's a good person to ask for
Yeah.
sure. And honestly, here's how I think Hodge should answer that question. This will be my take on how I think he should answer it. He's not answering it this way, but if Hodge wants any advice from me, this is how he should answer the question of you didn't get a Power 4 transfer. I didn't get a Power 4 transfer, but I also got a lot of players that Power 4 schools wanted.
Yes.
He got Eagle Staff. He got Honor Huff. Power 4 schools wanted those kids, and they chose Hodge and West Virginia instead. And yeah, there's NIL bump from last year, but even with more money, he's a lesser-known coach than DeVries, and he still beat out other Power 4 programs, including notable quality Power 4 programs for some of his transfers that are on this team. This goes to high school recruits, to the transfers. So that, I think, is a big deal that fans need to not miss. Yes, there's not a Javon Small on this team. Yes, there's not an Eric Stevenson on this team that had consistent power experience. Javon Small at least had that year at Oklahoma State. There's not that guy on this team to lead and say, okay, you haven't been there, but I've been in a major conference. I can show you the ropes. That guy doesn't exist here. However, there are players that have been in the tournament. There are players that have won a lot. There are players that he knows very well from North Texas that at least won there, even if not in the NCAA tournament. And Ross Hodge has not coached a team to the NCAA tournament. So if you don't have that experience from you have to at least kind of promote that, hey, there were other schools that wanted these kids, and I got them. And the schools that wanted them were not just all mid-majors. A lot of them were power schools. So that has to be a feather in your cap that he beat out some legit programs for those kids. It's not like Kentucky's going to throw offers because they're one of them. It's not like Kentucky's going to throw offers at kids they don't think can play. Maybe they wouldn't have started some of those kids that are on West Virginia. They're going to be started. Maybe they would have been on Kentucky's bench, but they still wanted them. So
decommitted from South Carolina to come to WVU, and
that's another one. Yeah. So like that's part of it that I think he needs to hammer home a little bit more than he is, that, hey, yeah, we don't have the Javon Small. We don't have the Power 4 transfer directly, but we have kids that Power 4 schools did want. And even kids that were going to Power 4 schools that then flipped and are now coming to us because of me, because of the program. Kids go to schools for two reasons these days, for the coaching staff and for money. So if they're going to West Virginia, either they're getting enough money, which is positive for the school in the NIL, or they like the coaching staff, which is also positive for the school because the coaching staff is in place. So those are two things that right now do seem to be a positive. We will see where the expectations are when we get closer to the season. We also will see what he does with that final roster spot. I would imagine it would be a non-starter. You did mention we don't know the starting lineup. That's going to be tinkered with. I know when I talked to him a month ago, he did say that he's not against having a different starting lineup, every other week. If it's not working, he'll change it. So you could go big, you could go small. That'll depend on the experience level and who plays, and whether Thomas gets in, for example, as a high school recruit. Maybe he gets in there somehow because of the size. Maybe they want to go bigger and rebound more than West Virginia teams in recent years, but that may change. I'd imagine, I don't know if he even went anywhere near in this direction. He can't talk much about it, but I'd imagine that final roster spot will be used by a non-starter, probably a player that's not of too much consequence. They just want to get another body there. That's what I would imagine would happen, even though there are still some transfer offers they have out, though, and they have made some even within the last few weeks, obviously also to high school recruits.
Yeah, and then it comes down to how many players out there who have not committed would you want in a starting lineup too.
Right,
you're looking at the depth of transfers, depth of high school players looking for a home still. I think that, he did mention a lot of people want size, but he was like, there's really just one really big guy out there at a time usually. So, and I think they have that with Harlan Obioa. I'm very impressed with him. So
yeah.
It is going to be really interesting to see how this team takes shape. You do wonder. I mean, he did say right now, looking at whoever's best available for that final roster spot. And, he did mention, like you said, you can mix and match this lineup. You can go big, you can have a small ball lineup. And I think I think we will probably see a lot of different lineups. I think there's a lot of potential for this WVU team this year. But he also did mention when it comes to playing in the Power 4 and being ready for that, he gave the classic coach answer of, You get to step within the lines with officials and prove that you're better than somebody else that night. And you know what? Sure. Like I'm a fan of
Yeah,
that. Like
yeah,
that's how teams win big games. That is
yeah.
how teams go out there and pull off upsets. I mean, go ahead, whatever mindset it takes to get this team to win games is going to be beneficial.
Yeah, to say the least. I think he's said and done and certainly talked the talk so far through the offseason. I do think he's had better offseason than many would have thought, even his detractors. Again, it wasn't perfect, but it's been better than what people thought it would be with his experience level. And he's said all the right things. He's not afraid to pump his chest and say, yeah, I don't have the rings on my fingers or the awards and all this of the Big 12 like some other coaches I'm going to face. I don't have Bill Self's resume, for example, but I'm going to go in there. I think I can beat him, and we're going to contend, and we're going to try to win some of those trophies and do it right away. Like, he's not out there. He's not giving you the verbiage, because there were some that tried to compare the hire to Neil Brown, even though we've talked about in the past show that was viewed as a positive hire back in 2019. But people were trying to compare it to that back then for the football program as elevating maybe an inexperienced coach at that level, even though Brown was at a group of five and had success, but not yet to the power of success. And at that point, if you remember, you were younger, but a lot of it
Yeah.
was year zero. This will be a process, trust the climb, that whole phrase, trust the climb. Like Neil Brown was saying in interviews back then, we're not going to figure we're going to win right away. The cupboard's bare. We got to get some time here. He got 6 years and, it didn't work after that. But Hodge is not saying that, because there's no fan that's going to give Ross Hodge 6 years. They're not going to do the Neil Brown thing again. There's pressure on him now. This is a different era than it even would have been in 2019 if he was taking the job then in that culture. So the 6-year thing is not going to happen anymore. And he understands that. So he's not out there saying you're going to trust the climb. We're going to have a year zero. No, we're going to have to compete to get in the tournament right now. And I think he gets that, because that pressure has been placed on him. And there has been recruiting wins, again, that I think are surprising to some. Jaden Forsyth, who's one we haven't even mentioned yet in any of these shows, they managed to get him after he was going to go to Xavier. That was a really, really solid recruiting coup for the Mountaineers. And he is a guard, but he's a player that they pretty much kissed goodbye, were able to then steal and bring into the program. We will see how much minutes some of those really younger high school recruits even get this year. It does depend on how deep they are, how close they are to actually winning right now, what they're trying to develop, how the team is looking. But for a player like that to come aboard, especially when you're reclassifying your years, which also has been done with players on this team, you're doing that thinking you're going to play. So he's going to have to tinker and get guys minutes. We'll see all of that coming up when the season gets underway as well. Luke Blaine, Mike Osta here, Mountaineer Report, available everywhere you get your podcasts and throughout the West Virginia Sports Now family of networks. We're going to end here, and it's back to football, because we're going to get to covering some football very, very soon. Rich Rod again talking, nothing new there. Also, other people talking about Rich Rod, nothing new there. David Pollock, formerly of College Game Day, did drop the bomb recently that he thinks Rich Rod's out of his mind and crazy. And I don't even know if Rich Rod would take it as an insult. Like, maybe he is. Craziness could be a good thing when you're a college football coach, so maybe he's crazy in a good way. But that he thinks his overhaul is kind of crazy. A lot of people are saying they trust Rich Rod and think the team will eventually win. Phil Steele even told me this when I had him on my mic drop show, that he thinks Rich Rod will eventually make them a Big 12 contender, but not year one, kind of where Pollock was going and others, that it's crazy for Rich Rod to talk about national championships in year one with a 70-player overhaul, and you can't expect anything right now, and that's just lunacy, but eventually it may come around. Where are you on the meter of Rich Rod being crazy? So 10 is completely out of his damn mind, and 1 would be that he is very, very calm, cool, and collected, insane. If you give me a number on Rich Rod being crazy, where are you?
With him, I mean, I can't. I'm kind of on the same plane of I can't really get behind talking about winning a national championship this year. At the end of at the same time too, what else do you expect him to say?
Sure.
Like that we don't. And yeah, give me like a 6. I think
Okay.
he. I think he's probably a little bit aware that some of these things that he's saying are a bit outlandish, and I think, yeah, I'll just leave it. I think that
Okay.
that's I think that that's safe.
Yeah. I mean, It's a nice headline. It was a little funny. He did couch it and did go further in. If we have the story up, there's more in the quotes that he does think the team maybe could do something. There are some that do have the caveat with their predictions that, I'm predicting West Virginia to be in the bottom of the conference, but they could be the dark horse team. Like, no kidding. Anything could happen. So that's kind of where a lot of the predictions are, because there's a lot of unknowns out there. And we're ahead of fall camp. We're going to get a lot more information about this roster when we get in there and really get to cover it. A couple corners we have on the site too. PFF put them as their top graded corners in the Big 12 for returning players. Both transfer additions, Michael Coates Jr. and Scruggs, those are two very underrated additions in the country that I thought were even underrated at the time, and they're now getting some national love. Kind of surprising, but that's a position that was really, really bad last year and cost the Mountaineers the brawl. If that all of a sudden is better, if they get enough from QB and the offense and everything else, I mean, there's just tons of questions and a lot of unknowns on this team right now. And, and Steele even told me that when he talked to Rich Rod, part of predicting them last is he asked Rich Rod, like he does every coach, what is your team going to do? What are your expectations? Who's your starter? Who's going to do this? Who are you going to rely on here? What type of goal are you setting? What type of numbers do you think this player has to put up to have a good year? And Rich Rod just told him, I don't know. We'll figure it out. I'm not sure. I don't want to say anything yet. We'll figure it out. And Phil Steele even said, like, what am I supposed to do? I don't have any information here. So that's just the Rich Rod way this offseason. So that's just where you're going to be prediction-wise. But maybe people can win some money on some over-under bets, because the over-under win total, I think, is at 5.5 right now. If you think they can at least get to a bowl, then you smash the over. We'll see. The beginning of the schedule is much easier than it's been in recent years. They're at least going to go 1-0. Should go 2-0. Should at worst go 2-1 before the conference play. Maybe you can go 3-0 if you win the brawl because it's at home. That's all right there. But it's also possible to go 3-0 and then lose 6 straight with the way the conference schedule looks. So we'll see what they do. But I think Rich Rod on a crazy meter is probably a 7 or an 8. I don't know if I'm necessarily saying he's crazy to predict big things in year one, even though I'm not predicting it myself. But I think he's just crazy in general. He's just freaking crazy. He's just a crazy guy. And I think being crazy is actually maybe good in this era of college football, or really any era. But to be a successful college football coach being crazy, I think, is a good thing. So I think he's a 7 or 8 in terms of craziness. And I think that's actually a good thing. I think his players know he's crazy. His assistant coaches know he's crazy. We in the media know he's crazy. The fans, I think, like that he's crazy. I'm not even sure he takes that as an insult, being crazy. He's not, illegally crazy. He's just crazy. He's kind of like that fun-loving, crazy uncle who can coach up a football team. That's kind of what the fans are banking in working out this year. So we'll see what happens. That'll do it for this edition of the show. We will have more in the coming weeks. We'll get into covering football camp, more of the basketball team and what's going to happen as they get closer to the season. The TBT, we'll see how far that team goes. Likely no more Ren Baker rumors, although never say freaking never, because people like to cook things up. But that was there. Maybe we'll get a Ren Baker press conference.
We're gonna break out the flight trackers again.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll happen. If you get any flights coming from Oklahoma to West Virginia on a random Friday night at midnight, people are going to speculate they're scooping up Ren Baker. But there is the contract extension now to worry about, and he's very much paid market value. So that's just the case in this era. But that's a big win, because I think they're trying to actively dispel some of the rumors, and some legit, some others. I do kind of get why people maybe were wondering about the Oklahoma situation. It's the first job that was not either a lateral move, and he's from there. But even when people were saying down there that he wasn't their top candidate, and people just kept banging the drum on it. So now there's the extension. So that's a factual thing that we know, that Ren Baker's not going anywhere, at least not today. But that'll do it for Mountaineer Report. You can find this show everywhere you get your podcasts, and also find our coverage at WV Sports Now. All right.